1949 represented a momentous year for Oldsmobile, for it was in that year that Oldsmobile would introduce one of its most famous nameplates, the 88, and also one of the engines that would make it famous for many years to come, the Rocket V8 engine. The 88 nameplate was introduced in 1949 to supersede what had previously been called the 78 in the model lineup, which was a straight 8 engine powered model that was smaller than the 98. There was also a 76 in the lineup that you can imagine was powered by a 6-cylinder engine as denoted by its last digit. The 88 thus was introduced with Oldsmobile's first overhead valve V8 that, along with Cadillac's V8 that was also introduced in 1949, represented General Motors' first foray into the overhead valve V8 engine configuration arena. When first introduced in 1949, the 303 cubic inch V8 had a bore of 3.75 inches and a stroke of 3.4375 inches, enabling that 303 cubic inch displacement. The engine from 1949 through 1951 breathed through a 2-barrel carburetor and produced 135 horsepower. It doesn't sound like a lot today, but you have to remember that in this time period, the very popular Ford Flathead V8 was making around 100 horsepower. So 135 horsepower was a third more than if you had bought a Ford with the Flathead V8. In 1952, this engine also got more powerful when it was outfitted with a 4-barrel carburetor and made 160 horsepower. And in 1953, the compression ratio was raised from 7.5 to 8 to 1, enabling the engine to produce 165 horsepower. So while the power outputs of the original Rocket V8s don't seem all that great by today's standards, they certainly were back in 1949 and the early 1950s when these engines were first introduced. So much so that Oldsmobile felt confident endowing the engine with the legendary, or now legendary, Rocket name. Of course, the Rocket name was born during the famous space race between the U.S. and what was then the USSR, and it certainly served as a source of pride for Oldsmobile division as well as the owners of Oldsmobiles to be driving something that symbolized the height of American ingenuity and engineering. When the Rocket V8 was introduced in the 88 in 1949, the Oldsmobile logo didn't have a rocket anywhere in it. In fact, Oldsmobile often displayed its logo with Oldsmobile spelled out in block lettering, either atop or, in the case of the 1949 Oldsmobiles, below a world logo that had a ring around it as seen here. In the coming years, Oldsmobile would use rockets in various forms across the vehicles to denote that the cars had some form of a Rocket V8 underhood, but the overall form of the Rocket was never really standardized from year to year and often varied. Take a look here, for instance, at this Rocket 88 logo on the back of a 1961 Oldsmobile Super 88. You can see here the rocket that is piercing through the 88 logo. Also for 1961, Oldsmobile's new senior compact, the F85, had a certain rocket logo that was displayed on the rear quarter panels, again, though not in a standard form that was used across the Oldsmobile lineup and across years. However, in 1964, the Oldsmobile brochure displayed a new rocket logo for Oldsmobile with what would come to be a familiar form on these vehicles for a number of years into the 1980s until the rocket logo was again redesigned. Many people associate this 1960s era logo with Oldsmobile, and in fact, it's one of the best logos that the division arguably did. But the question remains, where did this particular logo originate from? Clearly, the Rocket came from the Rocket V8 engines underhood in Oldsmobiles at the time, but why did Oldsmobile elect to put the Rocket in this type of a form as opposed to something that was different? For example, the stylized rocket that appeared on the 1961 F85. Why didn't Oldsmobile elect to use that across their lineup? Well, the answer to this question and the inspiration behind this 60s era and 70s era rocket logo may surprise you a bit. Let's first take a look at this early clay model for what would soon become the 1966 Tornado. This is obviously not the final production version of the car, but it is an early clay model that designers and sculptors were working on. Notice there are some very clear differences between this model and the production model, Mainly that those feature lines that are inboard of the headlights are much more pronounced here, as well as the so-called barbell theme on the front end, where the outer ends of the vehicle swell a bit compared to the midsection. You'll also notice the slots in the bumpers mimicking the eyebrows over top of the headlights, being much larger than what would end up in the bumper on the production version. However, take a look in particular at the logo that's affixed at the center of this clay model. Does it remind you of anything in particular, perhaps from a different automaker even? If you said that it reminds you of the Lincoln logo of the time, you get the prize. In fact, Oldsmobile took inspiration, apparently from Lincoln, in developing its new rocket logo that would be launched in the 1960s. Oldsmobile chief designer Stan Weiland wanted to come up with a new logo for Oldsmobile and wanted it to have that upscale flair. So as opposed to borrowing from Cadillac that had a very notable wreath and crest, or at least a crest, he took the inspiration from Lincoln and effectively put a rocket into the Lincoln logo and made the logo a little bit skinnier than it was on the Lincolns of the time. Let's listen in to Dick Rusin talk about this time period in Oldsmobile design history. Dick was a junior designer in the Oldsmobile studios during this time period and worked as part of Stan Weiland's team. He would later rise to direct a number of GM studios, including those for Cadillac, Chevrolet, and Opel.
I'm not sure exactly when it was that we worked on the emblem, but Stan wanted to change the Oldsmobile emblem. I think if you remember, it was the world in an oval or something. I can't quite remember.
Oh, yeah, in the 50s, I remember.
Right,
yes.
Yeah. And Stan wanted a new emblem. And Stan said, I want to do a Lincoln emblem, but with a rocket in it, Rocket 88.
You're kidding.
And so
you can see that.
That's where that came from.
Wow.
It was that simple. I mean, I'm sure he thought about it for a while, but the idea of using an upscale brand emblem, the Lincoln, and then putting something from Oldsmobile, it was very well known. Rocket 88 at that point in time was big stuff, ever since the 49 Oldsmobiles.
Yeah, the Olds' first overhead valve V8.
Right.
I thought it was funny, to your point, they called it the Rocket, and then I think it was 1975, they dropped the Rocket name because the horsepower was so down that they didn't think that it suited.
Not a rocket anymore.
It wasn't a Rocket anymore. The labeling on the air cleaner changed, but you can see it now in the logo. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And there you heard from Dick the story of the rocket logo and how it was developed. Now, another interesting question associated with this logo is, Lincoln inspired it, but did Oldsmobile actually inspire Lincoln? You'll recall that until the 1969 Mark III was introduced, that the Lincoln logo was a little bit fatter than it was in terms of what was introduced on that 1969 Mark III, where the Lincoln logo was made much skinnier, and the points were taken off the top and bottom of the logo and significantly minimized on the horizontal ends of the logo. It's not entirely clear why Lincoln decided to make this change to its logo and introduce it on the 69 Mark III, nor is the inspiration for the change very clear. But could it be possible that Oldsmobile took inspiration from Lincoln in developing its rocket logo, and Lincoln hence took inspiration from Oldsmobile in developing its revised Lincoln logo? Perhaps, but one may never know. At least we do know that the inspiration for the 60s-era rocket emblem was indeed Lincoln. And interestingly, Ford Motor Company, I suppose, helped play a part in developing the Oldsmobile logo of the time. Hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the Oldsmobile rocket logo. If you did, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. And if you're interested in learning more about car design, as well as De Tomaso Mangusta's, Dick Rusin, whom you saw in this video, has written a book called Bella Mangusta about both. Feel free to check it out on Amazon and pick up a copy. Thanks again for watching.